Hello and welcome back to the latest and greatest episode yet of the Big 12 Huddle. I'm your co-host Calvin here with the CGA Tour podcast, the Oklahoma State football, basketball, wrestling, baseball, and every other Oklahoma State sport podcast for the College Huddle as part of the Big 12 Huddle as well too here, I guess. And I'm joined by my co-host here tonight, as always, Night Bengal from the Knighted Ones podcast, the UCF affiliate of the College Huddle. Roger, Night Bengal, how's it going?
All right, good man. Big 12 hoops season. We're 4-0, baby. 4-0.
You know what? We are also undefeated here in the Big 12 hoops session because football wise, as the Oklahoma State fan here, I'm not really just one to talk all about Oklahoma State football. So we can stick with basketball here for as long as possible. But I do have to say, I think the people are here for the football takes. And right now, we've got a Saturday's Warrior, the BYU podcast of the College Huddle network here, and Trevor from Saturday's Warrior. I'm sorry, that is a heartbreaker of a loss there at the end of the day. I mean, who knew Jalen Daniels could be the punter of the week?
Did anybody check in on him to make sure he's okay? I mean,
he's active. He's active on X/Twitter. You know, I mean, he's getting out there. He's repping the brand of the BYU Cougar brand.
I don't know. I thought he might have OD'd on Cougar Tails and caffeine-free coffee or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Who knows? But now we feel bad because at the end of the day, having a punter of the week be your quarterback is just an odd thing. And I'm making that stat up. It's not really the punter of the week, but Jalen Daniels with that punt. I don't know if he tried that 100 times out of 100 times again, if he'd be able to hit what he thinks is the DB on a wide receiver going towards the end zone in the helmet of all places too. It's not like hit him in the pads where it deflected off just a little bit differently or whatever. And who knows what would happen, but just incredible placement. And also then BYU gets the ball back and gets another couple chances. This was to start the fourth quarter. It wasn't like the last chance of the game of the flukiest play ever. So I'm not feeling all that bad considering that Oklahoma State doesn't have a win in the Big 12 yet. Maybe I shouldn't be talking though. So I don't know. What are your thoughts here from that? Because at the end of the day, that is how they lost. They lost to a KU team that maybe will make a bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was not expecting that type of performance out of BYU. I was expecting a dominant performance, to be frank. I mean, KU showed some signs of life last week, but BYU is pretty good defensive team, and they held KU to 17 points. It's just the problem was their offense just completely sputtered. They were moving the ball. I don't know what to say, man. Sometimes in college football, things happen, and then you add on the layer of the Big 12 on top of that. It's chaos. The bigger picture with all of this stuff is, look, BYU is going to be fine. They're going to win again next week, or they're going to win again. They're probably going to be in the championship game. The question is what does this do for the Big 12's postseason hopes? Because they were the auto qualifier and all this stuff. Then you have, people out there saying, well, maybe Boise State will get the Big 12's auto bid playoff spot. I don't think that's going to happen, folks. I mean, Boise State's playing really, really well this year. They've got Ashton Genty, who's playing really, really well this year. I don't see a non-power school in Boise State, unfortunately, getting even undefeated, getting a bid. Hey, you know what? If they do, I'm going to be really upset because UCF was undefeated and we didn't make the playoff. And then we were undefeated again the next year and we didn't do it either. So, not taking anything from Boise State. They've got a good team. But I don't think Boise State's undefeated in the Big 12. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, Boise State is not undefeated in the Big 12. I'm hating the fact that BYU is ranked below SMU when they have won the head-to-head matchup against SMU, and the only loss SMU has is to BYU. But nonetheless, I I am a little worried here though that the Big 12 will get screwed out of a home game of excuse me, not a home game of hosting one of the near six games slash having to buy in the first round. And
Who would be the other champion that would boot us? Or the Boise? You think they would put Boise ahead of a Big 12 champion there?
they can put the at large if the at large is ranked higher. That's what can happen.
But do you think that would happen?
Honestly, I think it's got a shot because right now, no Big 12 team is. Well, a Big 12, if it all started today and it was just the top 12 and there wasn't automatic that the Big 12 gets a spot, Big 12 wouldn't be in it. So I do think it's quite possible. And I think the best option here for the Big 12 is to have either BYU or Colorado win the whole thing. And it's really got to kind of be BYU. I'm curious though about this weekend's matchup here. BYU going to Arizona State, who's also an 8-2 team just like Colorado and is making a name for themselves here a little bit here and there. Now they're ranked 21st here, and Colorado's ranked 16th. So I don't want to give it all, say Arizona State's here got a bunch going for them, but I'm worried about the Big 12's chances here. To really make a name for themselves because we've talked about this last week. We talked about this repeatedly. The Big 12 brand is just getting disrespected week in, week out, and we need to have a team almost that is just gonna win two because TCU 2 years ago, awesome. Like that gave a lot of standing in the Big 12 in my eyes of everyone saying this year, hey, well, BYU lost, so they didn't have a chance anyways, if they lose in the first round or whatever it may be in the college football, I guess invitational as you've said it. So I'm curious here what'll happen and how the Big 12 will be treated next year if BYU doesn't, make it out of the first round or doesn't win their game at all in the Big 12 winner. Because I assume right now they're going to win the Big 12. Now I could totally be wrong. They have not played Colorado yet. They will not play Colorado this season, but maybe they will in the Big 12 championship. We'll see. TBD.
Yeah, it's it makes for good football, but it doesn't make for good um, positioning when it comes to the invitational. So the top heavy conferences, I mean, you look at Miami, how many competitive teams do they really have this year in the ACC, right? SMU, I don't know. I haven't watched enough of SMU football to really say whether they are as good as they say they are or as good as they're ranked. I guess we'll come to find out. I think the SEC is definitely not the SEC that you're used to. They're not as dominant as you would that they like to portray themselves. So as far as the Invitational is concerned, I think eyeballs wins out here. Question is, would a team like Boise State assume they go undefeated the rest of the way? Would they draw more eyeballs than a Big 12 champion playing in that spot?
I think they probably would. Now, I do think that is also indicative of the ESPN and SEC network and ESPN and ACC network, and basically now being the whole ACC network, period, being a ESPN product. I think that helps out a lot in the entire just brand recognition. I mean, if it was the Big 12 network where it was done by ESPN, it was on its own ESPN channel, but instead it was the Longhorn network for quite some time, and then that's kind of why we have the new SEC network as it is because of the Longhorn network in the first place. I don't want to go back too far into the history books for that one though, and just to say, it sucks that the Big 12 right now does not have a team that has been in the conference for more than 2 seasons be like the name right now because Colorado. Yeah, they're back in the Big 12, but they're new. It doesn't help. I think in my mind, it doesn't help the Big 12 brand overall as a, hey, you're coming into a conference and stuff. It just means that we're raising all boats. It's not a big difference here, though, overall. You're just saying, hey, everyone who comes in, they're also just as good as the other teams that were already in the Big 12, which is good. I mean, that just means that, hey, all super competitive. But I do think when teams are joining the Big 12 from non-Power 5 and they're coming in and they're playing just as good as the teams that were already Power 5, that's where we're seeing a little bit of, okay, wait, was the conference that good to begin with? Now that OU and Texas have left, are they still really
Well,
on
I mean,
par, or how have they
I, I,
fallen
I
off?
would argue the opposite, right? So for a long time, I don't know if you remember, but when this whole back and forth was happening with the pack, right? The argument was when Texas and OU said they were leaving, all the national media was saying, "Hey, the Big 12 is going to make $15 million a year. It's, going to basically be a glorified G5 conference." There was all that narrative that was going on out there. But I think from a reputation perspective, the Big 12 kind of bounced back after that. So I do think that there needs to be some sort of separation. But even all of the teams that were getting the national buzz, previous Big 12 or not, like Utah, didn't pan out. Oklahoma State didn't pan out. Kansas State has faltered a few times. So all of the media hype gets lost. That's through the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season towards these teams. When they're out of conference and then they go into conference, that off-season hype gets carried over, and then all of a sudden they're not who we thought they were, right? Then it's too late to start a whole new media narrative. I think you're seeing a little bit of that. I mean, obviously Colorado had hype the whole time just because of the whole Coach Prime thing. But I think that's a big part of it too. Now, again, at the end of the day, as it pertains to the Big 12 standing, we always knew it's going to make for fun football, but it's going to be difficult unless we have a couple of teams, 2 or 3 teams that kind of separate themselves consistently in the conference. So is it better football? Yes. Is it more fun Saturdays? Yes. However, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, Clemson wasn't anything special for a really long time. And then they started being consistently in championships, right? And so now they're looked at differently. Who's that team going to be for the Big 12? That's going to be the big question, in my opinion, on a go-forward basis. But right now, I think nobody's talking about the Big 12. Nobody's thinking about it. ESPN, the College Game Day hosts, were actively dissing the Big 12. You just had this big deal that just happened this week. There was a big lawsuit over the NBA show that was now moving to ESPN and ABC. And guess who got thrown to the wolves as to extra content that's going to end up going on TNT and their network? The Big 12. So you're going to have Big 12 hoops games that are going to be there. You're going to have Big 12 football games that are going to go there. And so at the end of the day, what's happening is that we have an advantage because we have skin in the game for both ESPN and Fox, right? But at the same time, we have a disadvantage because neither one of them own all the rights. And so Fox is doing their job, right, with their show. But unfortunately, they just don't have the viewership that ESPN does right now. And clearly, because of the ACC's, contract for their network and them having a vested interest in its success and those advertising dollars, ESPN is going to marginalize us, and we're going to be the odd conference out when it comes to that, especially since Texas now has moved on to the SEC.
Yeah, it's troubling for sure. Mainly, I'm worried about it mainly because it just weakens, I think, the image and the brand. Now, TNT getting the Big 12 for hoops, I think that's kind of maybe a little bit of a strategy on their play here. I mean, they definitely did not want to give up ESPN, and the TNT deal for free for nothing with the NBA. So they definitely wanted something back for it. And I think they're going to work towards hey, maybe it's a Big 12 TNT partnership where football, it just is,
Well,
hey, we're just going to have that going on TNT. It's going to be a Big 12 network, basically.
Well, I thought for basketball for sure, right? TNT's been in the home of basketball for a really long time now. and they put on a good show, and they're continuing the contracts for the existing cast, but they're also have the rights to start a new show. So the thing I thought of first is this is right up Brett Yormark's alley and being able to monetize basketball, because it's another player, and they've got history with basketball and have produced a quality product for basketball. So I do think TNT is probably thinking about it this way. I think Brett Yormark's probably thinking about it this way is, when we're ready to separate hoops, like he's been talking about, this might be a dry run for that. And can that be advantageous for the Big 12? So in that sense, it could be. Unfortunately, the football product may be a hindrance. So if it's football only, how much of a contract is that going to actually garner? Because in some ways, I think basketball, it's not like a lot of the conferences that are football, pretty much everything is derived from football. Basketball is an afterthought. The Big 12 has the premier basketball conference in the country. And so that kind of offsets, you can give a little bit less for football and still end up with the same amount if you look at what they're paying for the inventory, as some of the other conferences that are more football heavy and are better, and are more, their values are skewed more towards football. So it's an interesting dynamic. I think TNT ultimately, I think this is probably a dry run. I don't think it was. I think TNT might have seen it that way because they don't want to lose the live content. And it may be the foundation for a Big 12 basketball only, home for Big 12 for basketball only.
Yeah, I definitely think it could be. And if that's the strategy that's to play, I think it helps out the Big 12 overall a lot. Just because then there is a one network that is amplifying up the Big 12. So I'd be a huge fan of that one here. What other reactions did you have though from the college football rankings here? Anything at all to make of, hey, seen Indiana creep up a little bit here. They're now fifth, and some of the disparity here between announcers or podcasters or media members or whatever you might want to say, still hating on Indiana or still hating on BYU, even though they've got one loss. I mean, anything at all to note here on those points? Because I'll say the big thing that happened in my eyes here is that we saw a Miami team fall from 4-9 after they lost a game.
Mm-hmm.
And now they creeped up one spot. We see a BYU team that was at 6 and then had one loss and fell all the way to 14. I know the rest of the season will play out in a certain way where all this will be figured out. Indiana's going to play Ohio State. One of those two teams is going to lose, of course. Then you've got just a bunch of other things that are going to happen here as well, too. You've got, K-State's going to play Iowa State, which we thought was going to be a big matchup, Big 12-wise, at least even a week ago. And now it seems like that's not really a care. But BYU, Arizona State here this weekend in Tempe, Arizona is all of a sudden a big game on the schedule for BYU because if they don't win, all of a sudden they've got 2 losses. Arizona State's got the tiebreaker. They've also got 2 losses, but have the tiebreaker. So a lot of things that could sort themselves out here. And then the other thing I want to say is that SMU and Miami, 2 ACC schools, are ahead of all Big 12 schools, even though SMU, of course, is the loss to BYU, and Miami also is a loss as well. So just interesting things here to note overall in my eyes.
Well, they've definitely created a tier system here, right? So if you look at it, you got Oregon, they're 11-0, cool. They should be number 1 right now, right? Then you've got Ohio State 9-1, Texas 9-1, Penn State 9-1, 10-0 Indiana, Notre Dame at 9-1, Alabama at 8-2, Georgia at 8-2, Ole Miss at 8-2, and Tennessee at 8-2, and then Miami, Boise, SMU, and BYU at 9-1. I mean, I don't know what else to say to that. I think for SMU, Boise, and BYU at this point, unfortunately, and I think in some respects, Miami, they're basically saying, okay, you guys are playing for the 4th spot. We're going to group you guys together. And they're ranking the SEC teams higher with the 2 losses so that they can stack the rest. That's what I think is happening.
Yeah, I do as well. It's very annoying to see here because, in my eyes,
It's an invitational. It's not a playoff.
Yeah, and in my eyes, Notre Dame here is just benefiting because purely off of brand. Like a Northern Illinois loss, a 7th seeded team, standings wise in their own conference, in Northern Illinois' own conference and the MAC, they're 7th. They're not that good. And Notre Dame lost to them earlier on in the season, though. So, hey, an early loss, whatever goes away still. That still is happening. I'm hearing strength of record, strength of schedule, hearing all these other, football power index, just anything that can make the SEC look good is what's being shouted out. And whatever doesn't make the SEC look good is just quiet as a mouse. And the Big Ten, of course, also has 3 teams in the top 5. Or excuse me, 4 teams in the top 5, followed by an SEC team that's just kind of in the mix here in Texas. And if anyone's curious, I don't think Texas has played anyone either except for Georgia, who killed them at their own place. So this is all going to work itself out. It will not be that big of a deal at the end of the day. Right now, it's a bunch of hoops and hollering, and everyone is just saying the words college football playoff rankings all the time instead of the college football invitational, or instead of just not talking about the rankings at all, too. This is a huge media driver towards the networks for ESPN and everyone else who gets to talk about it, basically, because the
Well,
selection
and
show comes out on ESPN and is revealed by them, right?
ESPN owns the invitational. They own all of it. And it's okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sorry, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of the top 10 brands ESPN has ownership in. I'm just saying.
Well, it's just the one team they don't.
Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Although they kind of do with the ACC because they play the ACC schedule. They have a fixed number of ACC teams that they play every year because they get paid by ESPN that way too.
Yeah, and then of course they have the ACC schedule for basketball, so they also get a ton of ACC opponents in there as well too, and just kind of ups the brand. The more we're talking about the words Notre Dame, the better for ESPN at the end of the day as well too. It doesn't hurt their brand too much to talk about.
No, it
Notre
helps
Dame.
them because they
Yeah.
still air games and own games that Notre Dame plays in the ACC and the network that they own. So, I wouldn't get. It's just like everything in college football. None of it makes any sense. The NIL combined with the getting rid of the requirement to sit out a year and all the other stuff, the safeguards that were kind of ripped out of the heart of college football. It's all a money driven machine. Now, that being said, Big 12 teams, ourselves included in that, we've got to back it up. Why does the Big 12 conference get so much attention for its basketball product? It's because we win a lot of games. And you see that in what happens, with the rankings. You have teams that are almost 500 making the tournament. You've got, or that are 500 in conference making the tournament. You've got teams that are getting a lot of exposure. You see Kansas everywhere. You see, there's a reason for that. And that's because we win consistently. And we go deep into the tournament consistently. And we have championship teams. So in some ways, we get the SEC treatment from that perspective, but that's because we've earned it. Do you honestly think that if it was the Big Ten that was having as much success as what we are in basketball, and the Big 12 had the Big Ten success, do you think you'd hear anything about Big 12 basketball?
Not a chance.
Exactly.
Not a chance. Yeah.
So again, at the end of the day, we earned it. We got to keep earning it. And Big 12 football's got to figure it out. But the longer we go with with now the conversion for media contracts being the limitation for how much you can spend on rev share and all of that other stuff that's going on right now, plus NIL, it's going to make it harder and harder for us to compete.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see how this works out for all of a sudden basketball players getting way more NIL money than football players, not even just per person, because of course, because the roster size, but just how different programs are going to work towards that KU. That's already got to be the deal no matter what. But
That
how is
already
it going to
happens.
be? Yeah, but how is it going to be when it's like a conference, not just a couple of teams within the conference? Yeah, will that change the dynamics a little bit of how the Big 12 just puts way more emphasis into basketball? We won't see as much emphasis into football from all the news and that type of stuff that comes out with football as well too. Will the coaches end up getting paid a little bit less in football in the Big 12 than they would be in basketball, et cetera, et cetera? How does this change kind of the scope of
My
coverage?
my my big thing there is I think that's exactly what leaning into basketball is exactly what Brett Yormark was after and why he's been talking about basketball as much. The question is what is that going to do to football? If it's just like schools that play both but are known as basketball schools. There are some schools that are terrible at football and basketball but always win lacrosse championships or soccer championships, or Vandy is traditionally a good baseball school. You know, they all have their focuses, right? And what happens when that focus changes on a conference level? The Big East, they made more than the G5 programs that offered both, right? But not by much. Basketball's at this point, because there's so many teams outside of the tournament, they're not going to make as much money off of a TV contract as they would football. So what does that do for the Big 12 in the long term? Again, we're talking about a lot of hypotheticals here, but there are some things that you can see that are happening within the college landscape and college athletics landscape that make a difference. And the other thing is, guess what? You've got 300 some teams involved in in Division One basketball. Why is that?
Well, it's a lot
It's
easier.
Well, not only that, but you've got the NCAA still owns the tournament. Who owns the Invitational?
ESPN.
Enough said. So until that changes, and that's why I was kind of hoping that they would have to split the contract. If they end up having to split the contract on the next one, I think that the Fox schools versus the ESPN schools, that narrative might change. But the question is can the teams be competitive long enough for that to happen eventually?
I don't know. Well, I'm curious here for sure how that'll shake out. But in the meantime, I do want to ask you as well another football question here. Of the games that happened this past week in the Big 12, anything more shocking than the KU upset over BYU?
More shocking?
Yeah. Or
No.
and if not, then what was the second most shocking thing? Because I've got it right here off the top of my head, which was Arizona State going into K State and then just beating them by 10. Like that was not that much of a game overall in my mind. Arizona State and Sam Levitt is newcomer of the week there for the QB at Arizona State. And heck, Scadaboo's of course still on the team, put up some
Well, he was
stats.
back this week.
Right,
He
that's
was
what I'm
back
saying.
this
He's
week.
he's still putting up some stats. He's still on the team, and you've got the quarterback now shining. They're just not Arizona State. They're looking all right. They're not just as one dimensional as I maybe had thought earlier on.
Arizona State is a good running team. Especially with Scadaboo in there. There's a lot of hidden yardage in there with Scadaboo because his yards after contact are very high compared to most running backs, right? That opens up the passing game a little bit too. But their offensive line, as far as passing the ball, is not as good. I mean, they were dominated when we played them. As far from the passing attack perspective. But as I've said all along with Arizona State, they've got a fairly good defense, and they've got a good running game. You have those two things, you're typically going to do well, and you're going to win a lot of games. You're going to win a lot of close games, and that's the key. And Kansas State really surprised me. I said earlier on in the season, remember I told you all for the first half of the season, I wasn't quite sold on K-State after watching them. And then they went on that stretch where they had some impressive wins. And I was like, okay, I'm on board. And now they've kind of gone back and forth. They haven't dominated on defense. They've had to win with their offense. And their offense is traditional type of offense. So that one was the biggest surprise for me. Although, Arizona State only scored 24, but they held K-State to 14 points. That was the biggest surprise for me for the weekend outside of that BYU game. Baylor, I don't know if you remember, I called Baylor winning last week against West Virginia. I expected them to win. But again, they kind of turned the Jets on at the end of that game as well and scored an impressive 49 points against West Virginia. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens this weekend when we play them. We'll get a close-up look with West Virginia, but the only thing that I'm a little worried about is it's supposed to snow, and it's 40 to 50 degree weather during game time, which is not good for Florida boys. I can tell you that.
Well, I don't think it'll be too good for Oklahoma boys either, but that's good news for us, at least, because this weekend's not going to be that cold. But for the other games here happening this weekend, besides just Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, I want to start off and ask you here, kind of run down the list. We've got all 8 teams in the Big 12 playing this weekend. So no more bye weeks for anyone in the Big 12 if you're going forward, which is great because both of our teams here were off this past weekend, right? Excuse me, no. Oklahoma State and Texas Tech were off, excuse me, but also UCF. So I want to ask you here, Arizona TCU this weekend, who you got and why?
TCU.
Okay.
Arizona's, again, it's a one-trick pony. If you shut down their passing game, they're done. So I'm going to take TCU in this game.
All right. What about just kind of 2-second recap because you just talked about the UCF West Virginia game, but what do you think here?
It's going to be interesting. I think we have the horses to win, but we find ways to lose. Well, honestly, the Iowa State game should have won. Should have won. Arizona State should have won. A bunch of other, and leading well deep into the fourth quarter, but finding ways to lose in the most crazy ways. And special teams, whether it be special teams or whatever. So I have no idea with West Virginia. We're playing in the cold at their place. It's a tough place to play. We should beat them. But they're also one of those teams that you don't know what you're going to get week in and week out and how they're going to play. So I'm picking UCF. Neil Brown is his offense uses the quarterback, will run the quarterback outside of, try to get the edge a little bit. I think we're much better than we were last year defensively. The DTs are solid, and we've got Dalen Dotson, who's really done a good job of maintaining the edges, and the defense has played really well. It'll be a question of whether we have stupid special teams blunders, and if we play a solid game, you're going to end up with a game like we did against Arizona, meaning, mistake-free football. Not completely free, but, reasonable. If not, it's going to be a close game, and we'll see who comes out on top. But, UCF should beat West Virginia, but we've had a lot of should this season, and we've lost a lot of games by less than a touchdown. So we'll see what happens. We started off much faster last week on offense. The offense, with our new quarterback the last 2 weeks in a row, has come out with a strong start. If that trend continues, our defense has played well as long as we don't have silly mistakes. I think this should be a dub at West Virginia.
All right. Well, I I'd love to see you guys beat West Virginia because I don't think a West Virginia team in the Big 12 championship would be a great look for the conference overall with 4 losses. Not that it matters that much as well either. Maybe it brings more attention and more eyes to the Big 12 because it's that competitive of a conference. I mean, but I'm just there, just making the joke. So I will say the next matchup here, though, is the Oklahoma State Texas Tech matchup on the Big 12 slate here for Saturday. It's senior day for the Pokes. I really wish I had a better feel for this game and thought Oklahoma State would have a chance. This is the last game though of the season I think they could win though. I mean, this is the last game. There's no way they're beating Colorado the week after this one on Friday, 11 a.m. There's just no way they're beating Colorado on a Friday after Thanksgiving. So this is the last game to me where you can kind of go out on at least a better idea of the season. That's just been complete turmoil. And one other fun fact here: the last time Texas Tech beat Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman was the quarterback for Tech. So how small of a world it is at the end of the day that he gets to go back and play his old school here on senior day. School that didn't want him anymore as their starting quarterback. He gets to go and play him. I just don't think that'll mean much, honestly. And I think Tech will win. They're favored by 3.5 right now. The ESPN matchup predictor has it like 50-50, which I don't trust whatsoever and haven't really in a long time. But in case anyone's curious, I give that stat out as well. And then Texas, I mean, they're 4-3 in conference. They've won enough games. They're headed towards a possible 9-win season. I talked with Spencer from the 23 Personnel podcast earlier this week, part of the College Level Network for Texas Tech. And he went on and on about how this win in Stillwater would mean a lot for the program for Tech. It would mean a lot just for kind of the motivation factor from coach as well too for Tech and others. Just hey, we went to Stillwater, we beat them as well. Like, yeah, they had a bad year, they're having a down year, but we didn't let their down year have a glimpse of hope at the end. We still shut them down, beat them. They don't normally beat Oklahoma State, and I definitely see Texas Tech winning as well. I don't know why I would pick Oklahoma State to win this one, except for just some kind of senior day redemption hope.
Well, that's the thing is motivation for me with Oklahoma State right now, right? I think I started this 2 weeks ago where I was asking you, I was like, does Oklahoma State, where's their motivation coming from? It just feels like a team that's given up on the season, which is crazy considering you have some talent on that team. Now, early on, you kind of did what UCF did and lost in some unique ways. But at the same time, you've got Ollie Gordon at running back. Texas Tech's defense isn't great. So if I'm Oklahoma State, I'm trying to slow down the game, burn as much clock as I possibly can with my possessions, ride Ollie Gordon to see if I can get a win. I just don't think the motivation right now for Oklahoma State, when you're 0-7 in conference, it's really hard to get up for the next game. So I don't know. This team, just when I've watched them, I watched a lot of Big 12 football this past weekend. I've watched some Oklahoma State games. It just doesn't feel like, they call it strain. The players call it strain when you play. I don't see the strain, and I don't see a reason for Oklahoma State to strain for this game. And I think Texas Tech comes out with a win.
Yeah, there's no bowl game possibility. There's no, hey, this season's okay because we got the backup quarterback in. To me, this is a season where several teams are circling Malachi Smith or Malachi Smith, our backup quarterback here. And several teams are circling him of just trying to get the guy to transfer after the season. And you had a quote from the Tulsa head coach here earlier this week. And the only reason I bring it up is for this quote here, which is, if you think our team isn't using a third party to go try to recruit players and scout with their players to transfer, then you really are way behind the 8 ball because every single team's doing it in every conference. Everyone knows this at this point too. And just is more troubling for Oklahoma State fan in the room as, okay, the guy who probably will be the third string quarterback on our roster next year, because we'll have 2 other guys who were ahead of him coming into the season were ahead of him. And he is the de facto second string right now because those guys are injured. So next year he'll be the third stringer. he probably would be, no matter what, anyways. And he'll redshirt this season, even though I would assume appear in 4 games if he does appear in the last 2 games of the season as well. But there's no way there's other teams. I mean, Baylor's definitely been one that's been mentioned here all over social media for Oklahoma State fans, as well as Utah. So we'll see if Smith will transfer or if he'll stay or whatever happens. But I'm just annoyed with how the whole
Well,
season's gone, and I don't think anyone has any motivation at all to answer any possible question. I don't see any motivation for this team except for maybe improving a draft stock a little bit here and there and going out on a better note. I mean, does Alan Bowman want to lose 9 straight in his college career? No, but has he got enough motivation, morale to get the rest of the team up for it? You would figure it already happened by now if he did.
I don't think it's Alan Bowman. I mean, I don't think Alan Bowman has anything to do with it because it's a team sport. It's not an individual sport, right? So, it just feels like a team that's, lost the locker room as far as their motivation to win. It's hard to motivate a team that's 0-7 to do the things that you need to do in football to win, which is strain, make those plays, do all those other things. And you brought up another interesting point about the NIL stuff. Gus Malzahn actually made a comment about this week in his presser. And typically, this part of the season is about trying to organize the dollars. Our strategy has been organize enough dollars for us to keep the players that we want to keep. And you're having those conversations now with those players to find out who's transferring and who's not. Because at the end of the day, he said, the way the rules are now and the way things are in college football now, you need to know right away because people are moving a heck of a lot faster. And the reason they're moving a lot faster is exactly what you said. UCF released a release this week talking about the NIL program being folded into a new subdivision of the athletics team, and how the money that's in the NIL that doesn't change until July 25th when the lawsuit goes through. And once it goes through, they were basically saying, keep paying the NIL. This is what we're going to do with the NIL money when this converts on the 25th. They've got a whole team that they've built around this to bring it in-house. So if you don't think that's happening right now, it is. And they're going to have, this team is going to be the general manager, roster management. They're going to do the roster management. They're going to do funds. It's basically what your GM, et cetera, will do in the NFL, except they're at a huge disadvantage. And it's going to take the coaches out of that. They're going to still do their high school recruiting, but it's going to take the coaches out of that roster management role. And you're basically going to get what the NFL or the other pro sports are doing. And that's what's happening right now. And that means your roster, the coaches are going to have even less control over what that roster looks like year in and year out.
Yeah, and I'm really curious here how teams will react to that going on to this next season with possible coaching changes as well. I mean, if, for example, if you have Deion Sanders leave for a different school, Florida State or somewhere else that's been mentioned, who knows where else he could even go.
UCF has been mentioned. There's a lot of rumors about Gus Malzahn retiring after this season. There's been a lot of rumors about him still having some bad blood with FSU. They've got a $68 million buyout for Mike Norvell, which I don't know how much you blame Mike Norvell because of the NIL situation there. But there's a lot of reporting out there saying that Deion Sanders wants to get back to the state of Florida, and UCF might be that landing spot. Let's just put it out there. And it's not from, message boards. This is actual reporters. CBS News reporter was pontificating about that for the third time this season. And he's one that typically is one that Gus will feed information through. And there's a lot of stuff within the program. There's a few people within the program that are donors that have mentioned that he may want to hang up his whistle. And if that's the case, I could definitely see UCF and Deion Sanders getting together and trying to make it work. Coming back to Florida, Dion wants to come back to Florida. He's still got pretty good Florida recruiting ties, and it would be getting back to what has made us who we are today, which is exciting brand of football, which we've kind of lost that luster with Coach Malzahn after the past 2 years. There's a lot of people that got off the Gus bus. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I'll tell you what, if Gundy did end up retiring, which I think is how he would leave Oklahoma State, or at least a mutual agreement to part ways, then I wouldn't be mad if Dion came to Oklahoma State either at this point, because gosh, we need something new, it seems.
I
20,
don't think
20 years of one coach, man, it worse than when it's over.
I don't think he would. I think the only reason UCF would have a shot at Deion Sanders if Gus Malzahn leaves is because he wants to get back to Florida. He can't go back to FSU. He's not going to UF. I think UF would make a play for him, but given that he played at FSU, I don't think he's going to UF. So it's either Miami or UCF, and I think he would do well at UCF. So from a recruiting perspective and an excitement perspective, what the results look like on the field, we'll see, but can't argue the results this year for Deion Sanders.
No, can't at all. All right, well, back a little bit here to the schedule for this weekend. BYU at Arizona State. I got to tell you, I think Arizona State wins. They're just on a roll. I think it's really, really close. I'm not saying Jack Retzlaff looks that bad, but throwing one interception and no touchdowns in a game that your team doesn't even score 14, that's tough. Last week here. So, and that's BYU KU game. That's tough to get out of my head here when it was a BYU home game too. So for those reasons, I'm picking Arizona State at home.
All right.
By a lot. Not by a lot though. Not by a lot.
I think BYU gets its head on straight and wins this week. I think that every team's going to have at least one game in a season that's going to be kind of like it's going to be a close game, even if you're undefeated or, whatever. Arizona State's got a good team. I don't see enough out of Arizona State, and I think BYU bounces back. They took it on the chin. I think they bounce back and win this game. So we'll have a split decision on this one. We'll see who comes out on top when it comes to that.
All right. Well, Colorado at KU. This one's in Kansas City, Missouri. So it's at the Kansas City Chiefs Stadium while KU redoes their stadium, but I'm picking Colorado over KU. I think the KU win last week, even though it doesn't look that bad in retrospect, because it's like, okay, well, wait, didn't KU lose to UNLV, who's now ranked? And, it just doesn't look, if you start looking into it just on the brief surface, it doesn't look too bad, but I think KU won off a flukish type of deal here, so I'm picking Colorado to beat them this weekend.
I'm with you on that. KU all season long, there's been a lot of games that have been close for them. I don't see KU beating Colorado this week.
All right. Well, and the next one is Baylor at Houston. We've had the Butt Bowl earlier this year, Baylor versus Texas Tech, but now the Bowl of Baylor versus Houston. I'm really stretching thin here for it.
Are you just gonna do BU and then anybody else who they play? I mean,
if they're the away game, if they're the away team, yeah, we should have had if Baylor had played at Oklahoma State, it would have been the Book Bowl. I mean, we've been really playing off it here. I mean, Bucks, Baylor played at K-State, missed opportunity there. But Baylor at Houston, I don't know. I mean, Baylor, it's a toss-up here. It's not one that matters too much, in my opinion, for the whole Big 12 slate. Now, I'm not saying the Oklahoma State Texas Tech game does it all, but I think Baylor beats Houston. I don't have a lot of trust at all in Houston whatsoever.
Yeah, I think Houston doesn't have the offense. They've got a good defense. They don't have the offense. Baylor, I said this earlier in the season, you were seeing signs of them starting to build, which is why I picked them in a few games that others did not. I think they're putting together, their offense is putting up points. They've got a fairly decent defense. So I'm going to go Baylor in this game because Houston has no offense to speak of. Their only offense has been off of defense. So I think Baylor wins this game.
All right, and then Iowa State at Utah. I'm picking ISU. I think Iowa State's got to end out this season here a little bit more of a warm streak. I mean, they're overall in conference. Iowa State's 5-2. They're 8-2 overall. It's not like it's been a bad season at all for them. At the end of the day, they're not projected to be up here this high, but Utah was not projected to be this low either. And I do think Iowa State will win.
I agree. I think Iowa State wins this game against Utah. They're showing some signs of life, but not enough to overcome Iowa State.
All right, and the last one is Cincinnati goes to Manhattan and plays Kansas State here. I'm picking K State. They've got to end out the season as well too with a little bit more of an oomph and emphasis. And they're a well coached team. It is odd, I think, that for them to drop the games they have. The Houston game, I'm willing to at least give them a little bit of a pass because it was a big rain delay and there was just stuff that happens. Rain delays, you never know what happens coming out of it. And it wasn't a home game for them either. But then the loss recently here at Arizona State, man, that looked rough. Although I'm going to come back to it and just go, I just don't think Cincinnati's that good. And I do think K State's pretty good. And they're only one win difference in the conference win loss column, but I still think K State's better. I'm picking them.
Yeah, I think Arizona State's definitely better than Cincinnati. I've watched them play a few games this year. So I'm going to go with K-State as well. And I'm going to say real quick, not to back up, but that Iowa State-Utah game, I think the big difference there is Utah doesn't have great quarterback position, and Iowa State likes to get turnovers. So I think that's going to be the difference in that game is they'll get a few turnovers that'll make Utah pay. As far as Kent State, yeah, woo. Sorry, K-State fans. I meant to say K-State versus Cincinnati. I just think that I think K-State's just the better team. And I think they turn it back on after the loss last week, and they win their 8th game of the season.
All right. Well, and then as we wrap up this episode of the podcast here, just want to name some mentionable games here coming up this weekend here in the Big 12 basketball slate because we just named all the Big 12 football. Oklahoma State starts out in the Charleston Classic tomorrow at Oklahoma State at FAU, but it's Charleston Classic. Baylor is against St. John's in the.
Well, hold on. That FAU team can score a lot of points.
Oh,
So,
I mean, if you want to talk into a deep dive of game, I don't think Oklahoma State will win. They're favored by 1.5 right now, but and this will be tough. It'll be a true test for Oklahoma State. They have not blown out a team or truly blown out a team in basketball this season. They're one heck of a fun team to watch just because the difference here in defense is huge from last season to this season, but it still is it's tough to watch Javon Small and West Virginia has put up 23, even though it's over Iona. Still, the guy transferred out of Oklahoma State and Javon Small, so it's a little tough to watch them play the other Big 12 conference games. I just we'll see what happens. OSU at FAU. Who knows?
the big thing with FAU, and I'll tell you this about them, they are a young team. There's pretty much a whole new team. We played them. They can score. They can shoot the three. The biggest thing about FAU that will hurt them is the fact that they have traveled as much as they have. So that will be in Oklahoma State's favor from that perspective.
Okay. Well, we've also got the Bahamas Classic, but the Atlantis battle here. Baylor, St. John's, and then Texas Tech at St. Joe's in the Barclays Center. All coming up here Thursday the 21st, depending on when you're listening to this. We are recording it the day before on the 20th. And then Saturday, Wisconsin goes to West Virginia to play in a different classic here, but against UCF. Any thoughts about that game?
Wisconsin's a really good team. They've got a lot of length. The thing about UCF is we didn't know we had a really good collection of talent. Some really, really highly rated, state 4 stars, 5 stars, and people that were Mr. Basketball for the state of Florida. You had 2 of them on this team. You've got several very highly rated 4 stars and 5 stars, and we've got a lot of depth as far as scoring is concerned. And the highest rated UCF recruit ever in the 5-star center, Mustafa Tiem, who was the highest rated center in the country. And he's starting for UCF at 7'2", and he's playing really, really well and can shoot the three. The difference between this UCF team and past UCF teams is pretty much everybody's shooting really well from the three. We got a new offensive staff member who's implemented a new offense this year. And I mean, we've scored 100 points this year. That's not something you usually see out of UCF teams. And it's really, really helped. The depth is good. We can go, I don't think we can beat Wisconsin. We've got a lot of length on our team, but we also can play small ball. And we're doing better at converting turnovers this year to points. So there's a lot of talent on this team. It's going to be a really good test, and it's going to be a defining test for me because Wisconsin's got a really, really good team. It should make for a good basketball game, and I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think this is going to be one of those technical games to see which team. UCF's been known for their defense. We've got the press working really, really well this year, the way it should be, and creating points off of a press because we've got the depth. It'll be really interesting to see. I think this is going to be a coach's game. And if you like to watch technical basketball to see the different strategies, UCF has flexibility, and it'll be interesting to see who the better coach is this week because I think the difference is going to be in the coaching.
I do too. But I'm excited for another couple of matchups here in the Big 12 in basketball this weekend. Now I'll just run through the slate here real quick before I get to it. Utah Tech at Utah, Hofstra at Houston, George Washington at K-State. But the matchup I'm really looking forward to here coming up on Friday the 22nd is Duke at Arizona. It's a late one Central Time here because it's 9:30, but that'll be a great matchup here. Two top 25 teams in Duke and Zona. Little Cooper flag watch here for any NBA fans in the Tankathon.
The Tankathon.
And
I like
Tankathon
it.
here in the NBA. We're still in November, and I'm talking about the Tankathon here for the NBA season. But the Oklahoma State Thunder have a couple of picks that could go their way. Saturday here, Cincinnati at Georgia Tech, Mississippi Valley State at BYU. Sunday, no games. But here are the matchups that I'm looking forward to here for next week in the Big 12 before we have another episode of the Big 12 Huddle, which is Auburn at Iowa State. Now it's the Maui Invitational here, so it's not a home game in Hillsdale, where Iowa State always holds opponents to like under 36 like, almost all the time. But number 4 versus number 5 coming up on Monday. That'll be a great game here for the Big 12. That'll be a great test here for Iowa State. And then on Tuesday, we've got another Big 12 team playing Duke, which is KU at Duke. It's in Vegas, so it's another invitational here, non-conference invitational type of deal. But we've got some fun matchups here. We get to see Arizona play Duke. We get to see KU play Duke. We also get to see Iowa State play Gonzaga. So, a lot of great Iowa State play Auburn. We just got a lot of great Big 12 matchups here coming up on the slate, and that's West Virginia plays Gonzaga here a week from today when we're recording this. So, just a bunch of great matchups. Excited to see them. Excited to see what happens. Anything super notable here from any of those matchups I just noted?
Well, I will say that, you mentioned two top 25 teams, UCF versus Wisconsin, the AP top 25. Wisconsin is ranked right now number 19 and is 4-0. UCF's ranked number 30. That was before our last win. So that's a pretty close top 25 matchup there. There's a lot of really, really good basketball. It's tournament season. The Greenbrier Classic, which is what UCF will be playing in, was why we're playing Wisconsin. LSU is also a part of that tournament, etc. So, try to check out these tournaments because there should be a lot of really, really good basketball this week. And outside of that, I think you did a pretty good job of highlighting the games that are out there. And the great thing about it is, basketball, you've got about 3 hours in each game. So definitely as we as we gear up for Turkey Day. Enjoy the football while it lasts, and you've got a lot of really good choices in basketball if you're a hoops fan as well.
Definitely do. All right. Well, where can all of the Big 12 fans find you, Night Bengal, and your podcast?
In Florida. No, just kidding. No, you guys, you can find although I was in Auburn this past weekend. So as far as where you can find us at the Knighted Ones. You can find me at Night Bengal. The Knighted Ones you can find anywhere where you may consume podcasts, whether it be YouTube, whether it be Spotify, any of the major broadcast channels. And you can always hit me up at Night Bengal. Would be happy to interact with you, and thank you for listening.
Of course, and you can find the CGA Tour podcast on Twitter, Spotify, iTunes, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, whatever social media network you're on. We've got it covered here. TikTok, Reels, Threads, everything is possible here
What
with
about
CGA
Blue?
Tour.
What about
Blue
the new
Sky?
one? Blue Sky. Are we
are
on there
as
yet?
well too? We made it over there because this
Awesome.
past weekend I was in Orlando, Florida. I was down your neck of the woods here checking out Disney World.
While I was in Auburn.
While you were in Auburn, of course. So we missed each other there, but we'll meet up in person here for a Big 12 Huddle spot. I'm sure at some point this 2025 year. But as always, here Night Bengal, thanks so much for joining here on the latest episode of the Big 12 Huddle. Thank you so much for listeners of the Big 12 Huddle podcast. Please share with a friend and comment down below your Big 12 team that you're watching for, or if you're just trying to hear some news and updates on the Big 12. Either way, let us know here. Let us know how we can make the show a little bit better. Any comments, suggestions, feedback, we do take very politely, but we do take under review, of course. And
it's why, guys, and if you didn't know, that's the reason why we are now on all of the podcast platforms as well, not just on YouTube. So we do listen, we do incorporate it into the show, and we appreciate your input.
And with that being said, go Pokes and
go Knights. Charge.